I don't remember exactly when. Maybe it was towards the end of high school or maybe early in college, but there suddenly was this point where my friends and I were obsessed with these strange circles that were appearing in fields in England and then around the world. Newspapers at the time really did seem to suggest that there was no earthly explanation, and I guess as a young man, I wanted to believe that maybe aliens were among us, leaving us cryptic messages in wheat fields. I think the history of crop circles would deserve to be remembered merely for the nostalgic purpose alone. They really did represent the weirdness of the 1980s. There's a reason that Stranger Things is set during that period, but they actually developed from a long history of mysteries and have somehow turned into sort of a cultural tradition that survives long after the mystery has faded. As strange as it seems, the history of crop circles deserves to be remembered.
The Bristol, UK Evening Post published a startling news report on August 16, 1980. 3 circles, it seems, had been discovered in a field near Westbury. They breathlessly reported that farmers are mystified by the 3 perfect circles about 18 yards across, and that there are no tracks near them, and the farmers say they are too well defined to be rain or wind damage. Speculation that they could have been made by helicopters was dismissed by the Army as most unlikely. The report, published in numerous newspapers in the UK, might have been the first to cover the phenomenon widely, but it was not the first time they were noticed. Author Pat Delgado writes in his 1991 book Circular Evidence that he began studying the phenomenon in 1981 after he was asked his opinion by a golfing colleague of a flattened circle in a field. Apparently, he wrote, they had been seen there and elsewhere on numerous occasions in previous years. The circles had been seen in rural parts of the United Kingdom at least since 1976, although they do not seem to have gathered much attention until the news reports in 1980. After the reports, the circles seem to have become, or at least have been reported, more commonly. The Evening Post reported on more circles discovered in Westbury in January 1981. And in 1983, the Bristol Western Daily Press reported that 5 rings were found in a barley field near Winchester. The circles certainly drew attention. In October of 1988, the Wiltshire Marlborough Times reported that 74 circles had appeared in the county of Wiltshire that year, and that farmers are complaining that crops are being trampled by people who are curious about the mysterious circles. Through the 1970s and 80s, most crop circles in the world appeared in Wiltshire County. Wiltshire is in southwest England. Although the population as of 2024 was over 770,000, the county is sparsely populated, especially in the southwest, while the northern part is dominated by Swindon, the largest town in the county. Farming and fields make up a sizable portion of the county. The county council notes that around 72% of the county is currently farmed, and farming continues to be an essential determinant of landscape character in all areas of the county. The phenomenon of flattened circles of crops was not the only landscape art in the county, known for the large hill figures where turf is cut down to a layer of limestone chalk, notable among them representing horses. The massive figures have been produced in England at least since prehistory. The largest, the Uffington White Horse, is 360 feet long and thought to have been originally carved in prehistory, like pre-Roman times. Although in Oxfordshire, the Uffington Horse is very near to Wiltshire and is only some 10 miles from Swindon. But beyond the chalk figures, the circles in the fields were not the first large circles in the county, as Wiltshire is home of Stonehenge and Avebury, giant stone circles older than the pyramids of Egypt. It's difficult to discount the possibility that the appearance of crop circles in this area is connected to other such monuments carved into the landscape. In fact, the history of crop circles in the rural United Kingdom goes back further than 1976. In 1678, a pamphlet was published called The Mowing Devil. According to the story, a farmer bargained with a poor mower over the cost for cutting his 3.5-acre field of oats. Asserting that the mower was charging too much, the pamphlet says the farmer swore that the devil should mow it rather than he. The greedy farmer then found the next day that the devil had, in fact, mowed his field, but how the said oats lay now in the field, and the owner has not power to fetch them away. The cautionary tale included a drawing of the way the field had been mowed, showing clearly a circle, or at least an oval, that the pamphlet said had been mowed so perfectly that no mortal man was able to do the like. Now, there is argument over whether the mowing devil represents an early documentation of a crop circle. An oval is not a circle, and the field had been cut, not flattened, and the event supposedly had occurred not in Wiltshire, but Herefordshire, some 70 miles away. But the story would have been recognized in Wiltshire in the 1970s, and so would have been part of the local lore when the circles began to appear. There are also antecedents in natural history. Notable in his 1686 work, The Natural History of Staffordshire, Robert Plott, a professor of chemistry at Oxford University, notes circles in the grass commonly called fairy walks, which he doth not think do owe their cause to the field conventicles of demons and witches, nor to the subterranean course of moles and ants, instead suggesting that they are the result of the percussions made by lightning. Today, most historians assume that he was talking about what is called a fairy ring, common in the UK and caused by a growth of fungus, often attributed to dancing fairies in British folklore. Some such rings turn a large, round area brown, owing to the fungus absorbing the nutrients. Again, the smash crop circles of Wiltshire are clearly a different phenomenon. But are these antecedents, or the folklore related to them, related to the modern circles? But actually, the more likely modern antecedents didn't occur in Wiltshire, but on the other side of the world. In 1966, a number of areas of flattened crops in banana and sugarcane fields were found in Queensland and northern Australia. Centered around the small town of Tully, the circles were described as compacted, much like the circles that appeared a decade later in Wiltshire. But the people of Tully were well aware of what made them. These were, locals insisted, flying saucer nests. The Sydney Morning Herald reported that a 27-year-old banana grower named Mr. George Pedley, who lived near Tully, swore that he'd seen a vapor-like saucer taking off from a swamp. The sighting was later confirmed, the paper says, by a school teacher, a cane farmer, and another local. The saucer left behind evidence, a 30-foot diameter circle of dead grass. But it wasn't the only one. The Herald reports that the saucer sighting did not reveal the first such nest. Rather, it called attention to a place called Horseshoe Lagoon, where several such nests had been seen. The paper reported that the flying saucer nests had drawn so much attention that thousands of visitors saw the nests in a few days, and a special police patrol was sent out to stop vandals from trampling them down. The discovery raised international headlines, including in the UK, where they would end up being connected to the crop circles of Wiltshire. In fact, from their first discovery, some had connected the Wiltshire circles to flying saucers. The 1980 article that first raised attention to the circles ran under the headline, "Mystery Circles Revive UFO Talk." Note that while in the US we usually say the three letters UFO, meaning unidentified flying object, in the UK the acronym is usually pronounced UFO. The UFO in question was the Warminster Thing. The famous first encounter with the thing occurred in the Wiltshire village of Warminster on Christmas Day, 1964. Several local residents reported loud noises that were described sometimes as a loud hum and sometimes as crackling that were loud enough to temporarily paralyze people. There followed, for a course of about 2 years, numerous sightings of UFOs, described as bright lights or a fiery cigar-shaped object. They were not merely a few random sightings. A reporter in the Southampton Daily Echo noted that witnesses represent a wide cross-section of the community. Urban district council employees, local councillors, a vicar's wife, a postmaster and his wife, serving officers of the armed forces, a wartime pilot, policemen, schoolboys, visitors from other parts of the country who happened to be passing through the neighborhood, lorry drivers. The reporter noted simply, "I find it easier to believe in the thing than a conspiracy on the part of hundreds of ordinary people to hoodwink the public." The sightings died down, but were certainly not forgotten when the circles were discovered in Westbury in 1980. The story, widely circulated, noted that the mysterious circles were reviving the UFO craze in Wiltshire, and that UFO experts think the circles could mark the return of the Warminster Thing. From the beginning, there have always been supporters of the idea that the crop circles were created by extraterrestrials. A 1990 newspaper article notes that British UFO watchers are convinced the circles are the landing sites of crafts from outer space. The chairman of one UFO society noted the circles have also appeared at Upton Scudmore and Clay Hill, where a homing beacon is reputedly buried. The happenings are usually preceded by the appearance of strange lights, often accompanied by a menacing sound. Certainly not everyone was in agreement in that idea. If initially the idea was the Warminster Thing, the Post reported in 1981 that the idea was rejected by the local UFO research organization called Probe. After investigation, the organization ruled out both an extraterrestrial explanation and helicopters. Rather, they concluded all tests have proved negative, and Probe says the likely explanation for the circles is funnel cloud or tornado damage. The tornado idea has its supporters, although the exact mechanism is less clear. A conference of various experts, the field of study of crop circles became known as cirrology, in 1990 concluded that the circles were the product of the freak melding of hot and cold air, creating vortices of energy that spun around at ground level. While a letter from a Mike Rogers in the Evening Post argued that the vortices were a feature of the cheaper types of supersonic aircraft, stating that whirlwinds were caused when such planes take off and land. He noted as evidence that crop circles were first noted around 1970 and became widespread in the mid-70s, and supersonic transport aircraft became flying around 1970 and entered service in the mid-1970s. Another alternative was offered by an electronic expert named Paul Ferguson and physicist Dr. Thomas Meaden, that the vortices were made by electromagnetic whirlwinds. But not everyone was convinced that vortices were to blame. In 1988, the London Observer noted that Professor Archibald Roy of the University of Glasgow was skeptical, noting that you get to the edge and there's a flattened crop, and 1 inch further they are untouched. The level of perfection seemed impossible for nature, and the professor opined that none of the explanations seemed to fit. Author Colin Andrews also thought a vortex could not explain the patterns, telling the United Press in 1990 that here we have something that is extremely graphic, something that is extremely symbolic. I think the bottom line is that we have an energy field that appears to know where it is, an energy field that has optical appreciation. The mystery attracted a significant amount of attention. The Evening Post reported in 1989 that not 1 but 3 different books were published on the subject that year. The books considered several explanations: solar energy, magnetic fields, static electricity, or visitors from another world. But of course, one suggestion was more earthly. The Avon Western Daily Press quoted a Lieutenant Commander Henry Bruce, owner of the field in Winchester where 5 circles had been found. People with the minds of children have done it. He opined that the patterns were the same on his farm and in Wiltshire because that is the only way it is easy to do, and added, wanton destruction of the nation's food is not funny. The Wiltshire Gazette and Herald reported that author George Winfield accused the British Army of creating hoax circles to diffuse public hysteria about the phenomenon. A credulous Army official responded that the Army has better things to do with its time and money than to be party to any such hoaxes. Still, the idea that the circles were hoaxes was generally discounted, with the 1988 conference concluding the idea that circles are caused by local pranksters had been largely rejected because there are never any signs of a tractor or person going to the location. Surrounding crop areas remain untouched. Professor Roy argued that there were simply too many for them all to be hoaxes. Andrews looked at the complexity of designs and put them in a computer model. He explained the computer had concluded that such effects could not be replicated by man. In 1990, a cooperation between Andrews, Delgado, a Japanese company, and BBC engaged in a $1.9 million surveillance program called Operation Blackbird that used heat, light, and sound detectors, attempting to disprove that the circles were being created by, the LA Times wrote, young farmers turning out of the pub or little green men. June 25, 1990, the project succeeded. The cameras caught a circle forming, with nothing involved but a few glowing lights. Delgado and Andrews told reporters that they had definitive evidence that the circles were made without the help of man. But when they went to investigate the circles themselves, they found proof that it was created by man, who had left behind plastic games as a calling card. The technology had proven too limited to fully observe, and the entire project was embarrassed. But that did not mean that all the circles were hoaxes, and Delgado was convinced he could tell the difference between a hoax and a real circle. On September 9, 1991, he was shown a complex circle. He walked around the circle, considered the design, looked for signs of humans, and he finally concluded, the New York Times reported, that the pattern in a Kent wheat field was the genuine article. This is without the doubt the most wonderful moment of my research. No human could have done this. He was, of course, wrong. The circle had been created by what the Times described as 2 jovial con men in their 60s. They had bent, not cut the crops, and left no prints behind, fooling the world's most famous cerealogist, using 2 wooden boards, a piece of string, and a bizarre sighting device attached to a baseball cap. Even more shocking, the 2 had been carrying on the gag for 15 years. It turns out the circles had really been related to the aliens after all. Sort of. Of course, familiar with the Warminster thing and the history of Wiltshire, and then reading about the Australian flying saucer nests, over a drink one evening in 1976, local man Doug Bauer suggested to his pal Dave Chorley, "Let's go over there and make it look like a flying saucer has landed." After years of making circles and presumably being copied by many others, they came forward. The British magazine Today reported, because they were sick of people making vast fortunes out of their circles. Delgado was impressed, saying that they are to be admired in the way that they have conducted their nocturnal escapades, but Andrews, however, was less convinced. Watching the two demonstrate their technique, he told the Times, "There's nothing here to impress us at all, except for two very fit 60-year-olds. In 2024, Andrews was mentioned on the website of All That's Interesting. He pointed out that there's no proof that all crop circles are man-made, and even if they are, he insisted that those who created them were prompted by an independent, non-human mind. And even that idea is not necessarily the strangest part of the story. Perhaps strangest of all, a natural explanation has been found for some mysterious crop circles in Australia's South Island of Tasmania. St. Louis Public Radio explains. The mystery of crop circles in poppy fields in Australia's southern island state of Tasmania has been solved. Local media report that stoned wallabies are eating the poppy heads and hopping around in circles. Tasmania is the world's largest producer of legally grown opium for the pharmaceutical market. Seriously, of all explanations, who had stoned wallabies on their bingo card?
And so for this brief period, crop circles captivated millions of people. An entire field of scientific study was created around them. Books were written about them. It was $1 million industry. It seems almost kind of silly. As Andrew Franknoy of California's Foothill College noted in the San Francisco Chronicle in 2003, the oddest thing about the crop circles is this idea that having come across light years of space using technology clearly beyond human capacity, that alien visitors would somehow take special delight in making cute little diagrams in wheat fields in the dead of night and then disappearing. For me, it really is kind of nostalgic, a fond memory, like coin-operated video games and bell-bottom pants. It represented a more innocent time, a time when my desire for mystery exceeded my skepticism. Like millions of people, I was disappointed, if not entirely surprised, when they were found out to be largely a hoax. Innocence lost. Although I don't think it was the craziest thing we believed, then or now. And in the time since, they've come to be embraced. There are annual competitions in crop circle art. Art in a field has somehow turned into a new field of art. It's almost quaint part of our past. Apparently it's going to remain part of our present and our future. What about you? Did you believe? Do you still? Feel free to comment. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.